G'day. There are a few comments made when I put the video out about making the replacement for this up about, well, why did I do this or why didn't I do that? And I thought it'd be instructive to sort of run through some of those things. I actually like it when people ask those questions in the comments, by the way, because it at least shows that what I'm doing is making people think, and if you've got questions, other people may have as well. And I certainly don't claim to be the most authoritative person on the internet, and so you may have a perfectly good way of doing something which I've just completely forgotten about or haven't considered or anything like that. So it's nice to be asked these questions. So let's get into that. Now, the first reason that I made the replacement for this out of solid was that was what I was asked to do. When someone comes in and says, can you make me one of these, but bigger, that's what you do. If they'd said, I need something like this, but to take a 20mm bearing, I might have thought about, well, can we sleeve that, or can we build that up, or all that sort of thing. But yeah, number one reason, I was asked, can you make me one of these? There were two main suggestions for how to fix this. One of them was, well, couldn't I get the base plate, drill a hole in it, and push a shaft into it? And the answer is, well, yes, you could. And with both the solutions that I'm talking about, it's possible to do them the way people have suggested. But the problem here is going to be that as this thing is loaded, and we'll assume the load's going like that, you're going to get pressure there, and you're going to get pressure there. Now this is only 7mm thick, so it's not very thick at all, and the load on a bandsaw blade can be quite large. You can pluck them and they'll make a note, so they're under a bit of tension. So my concern with doing that sort of thing would be that because this isn't very thin, it's going to pull down here, it's going to pull up here, possibly distort the material, it'll come loose. If you're on a desert island and this is the only method you had to fix your bandsaw, well, you could do that. And the way I'd probably do that is I'd probably put some weld in there. So weld around there, weld in there, and that would probably do it. Okay, that'd get you something that it could at least be used. Now, how long that'll last for, I'm not quite sure. It's going to depend a lot on how good your welding is, among other things. The other thing to think about too is that some of these steels, when you weld them, you take them back to an annealed state, and they might have been work hardened in rolling or something like that, and so you need to be careful with some of this sort of stuff that just say, oh yes, we'll just slap lots of weld on it, and you could actually be making things weaker. The other suggestion made was, can you sleeve it? Now that one's a little trickier because of a number of things. Firstly, once again, if we put the load in there, on the original part, that's a diameter 19 shaft. It's got plenty of meat to resist that, the forces there. It's got a radius there, so that lowers the stress raising of it. But what you've effectively got is you've reduced the shaft down to, say, 16mm. Or 5/8 of an inch, maybe, whatever floats your boat. But what that means is that then, when the force is applied here, this is the corner that's going to have the most stress. And because you've reduced the diameter of that, you've weakened the part. Okay? So there's something to think about there. Now, the other thing that needs to be thought about when thinking about sleeving is, okay, to make that part up, the replacement part up, I had to turn one diameter accurately, and it had to be perpendicular to the hole through there. Not terribly well. It took some time to get there, but it's not horribly demanding. However, if I sleeve this, I'd have to either bore or ream that tube, and then I'd have to turn this piece to be a matching fit, and that could be a slight press fit, or it could be a slip fit with some Loctite or something like that. Once I'd done that, I'd then have to machine this outside surface. Now, it's been suggested, well, could you just machine that to size, ream your hole in there, slide that on, everything's wonderful. Well, you know, you could, once again, if you're on a desert island, this is the only way you had to repair it, you could, but there's a possibility that, you know, if your reaming isn't dead center, that you might have this thing so it's doing this. Right? So, you know, there's a possibility there that this may not line up. Now, as I said before, because this is pivoting, this direction doesn't matter, but the other direction may. So you've got to watch that one. The other thing is you're still going to have to put this up to put that circlip groove in there. And the reason for that is if you think about, you know, what that's going to look like. Oh, wrong way. When you push that on, the weakest spot is going to be through here. And so when you push that, unless you've got your fit so it's just right, you might end up crushing this circlip groove. And so you're going to have to put the circlip groove on later. Okay? But there are other problems too. If you remember when I made this heavy-duty die stock up, I heat shrank a sleeve onto the outside of this part as it was, because I wanted to get a little bit more meat for these screws. Now, one thing I didn't show you, but I found interesting, was that when I bored this out before I put the sleeve on, that was 2 inches and about 9 thou. When I put this sleeve on there and I remeasured this, and this is stone cold at the moment, it's now 2 inches and about 5 thou. Right? So I've lost around about 4 thou, tenth of a millimetre, just by shrinking that sleeve on. Now when you think about it, that makes sense, because you've got a thin bit of material here and it's being compressed by this sleeve and it's pushing back, and you've got a thin bit of material here and it's being pushed out by that and it's pushing back. So, you know, I would expect that yes, this inner diameter is going to shrink a little bit, just because I've now got a compressive force on that. So if you think back to the idea of sleeving the shaft, it means you're still going to have to machine the OD of the spigot once you've got it in there, because if you've got any sort of shrink fit on there to make that hold on, it means that you may have changed the dimension of the outside shaft. Now that's for a bearing. When I made this, I was about 6 thou over, and I had to take that down to basically nothing to get the bearing to fit. Now, two things there. One is that a bearing is going to be very much like this, whereas if I have this oversized and I force the bearing on, it's going to push the inner of the bearing out, which might make the bearing stiffer and possibly even jam up. And I've had that happen to me before I realised what was happening. Okay, but what that means is that if you turn a sleeve nicely to size and then shrink fit that on or whatever, it's not going to be to size anymore. If you use Loctite, you're possibly a bit better off, but you know, one of the problems with that is, well, how long is it going to last? Is it going to last? Okay, so you know, there's the aspect of, if you shrink something onto a reduced diameter spigot, is it going to be the right size once you finish putting it on there? This last one's one that I've been caught by myself personally, so that's why I'm telling you about it. I've got a bit of 24mm black bar in here, and I've drilled a 5/8 hole down the middle just to pretend it's a bit of pipe or something like that. I'm now going to drill that with a 20mm drill just to take it out to a 2mm wall thickness, and then I want to do some measurements. Now that was a bit embarrassing because I grabbed the 22 instead of the 20mm drill and drilled this out. So I've only got a 1mm wall thickness, but it illustrates the point. I've got a 3-point mic here, and when I measure the tube here over the you know, with the points of the mic against the jaws, I get actually 21.82. Okay. Now, when I put this in here, I did this chuck up as tight as I could, so because I didn't want it spinning. You can see it has spun. I'll show you that in detail in a minute. But the important thing is this: if I back that off and then I move these so that the points of the micrometer are between the jaws, I'm getting 22.32 millimeters. Okay. What's happened there is that the pressure from the jaws has squeezed the material in. You've taken out the stuff in the middle, which has relieved some of the strength, or taken some of the strength away, relieved some of the stresses. And so what's happened is it's bulged out here. All right. So if you're making up a sleeve to go on something, you can't just hold it in a chuck like this. You know, ideally you've got to be working on your sleeve out here while the stock is carried in the chuck. That then brings into all sorts of problems with reaming into a blind hole and all the other bits and pieces that you might have to worry about. Now there's that bit of black stock, and it was nice and uniformly black and all that sort of thing, but you can see it spun in the chuck, because as soon as the material was relieved out of there, suddenly the material could self-relieve in terms of stress, and there's no clamping force. Now if I'd stopped halfway through and said, oh gee, you know, it's spinning, I'll clamp it up a bit more, I would have made the problem worse. So that's just something or some things to bear in mind for doing this sort of work. Now that almost a millimetre of movement between the good bits and the bad bits is obviously no good for fitting a bearing, but you know, you imagine you've got to keep that to within 10 microns or so. This isn't going to cut it. So they're just a few of the reasons why, you know, sleeving or putting in welding in a stub shaft, yeah, they'll get you out of trouble, but they're not necessarily the best way of doing things. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this has been enlightening for some of you, and we'll see you for the next one.